Hi everybody, welcome to IndyCar on Wednesday the 13th of March, and today is, well, it's the dead dog party for Mrs May's deal really, isn't it, when you think about it. So what happened yesterday? She got another clubbing by her own MPs. Over 70 Tory MPs rebelled and decided that Theresa's deal just wasn't good enough. Mrs May's voice finally gave out and she looked like she was fit to explode by the end of the session last night. She was so angry. Not very often that you see a British Prime Minister genuinely red in the face and physically restraining herself from having a go at the people who caused her so much discomfort. So watching this last night and the following what would you say, coverage, for want of a better word, from the BBC, which gave 99.9% of its time to Mrs May, an awful lot of talking heads from the Tory party, followed by an awful lot of talking from Jeremy Corbyn and talking heads from his party, and something like 17 seconds of Ian Blackford's response. And the idea that Scotland has any kind of role to play at Westminster has been completely debunked by the way the BBC has been behaving, by constantly cutting away from Scotland's Ian Blackford as soon as he gets up to speak and on anything at all, doesn't matter what it is. So Scotland is being made to disappear by the magic of television, and it's never mentioned in any news broadcasts at all as being part of the Union. But the BBC continues to concentrate on Ireland as being the part of the United Kingdom most likely to break away from the United Kingdom, as though Scotland doesn't exist and as though Scotland doesn't have a 60% majority now for independence, which has been reported in the polls recently. So as things are going from bad to worse, and today it's likely that it might even get worse still. The interesting thing, as far as I'm concerned, is that the flow or steady flow of so-called managed no-deal Brexit chaos that Number 10 is pouring forth at the moment. Its various arrangements and plans for what happens if MPs reject the idea of basically delaying Brexit in favour of exiting with nothing. And many of us in Scotland in particular, think that this has always been the plan, that the Tories have been winding down the clock and coming up with the worst possible Brexit deal so that they can simply leave the EU without making any effort to repay their debts, and to hell with business and to hell with the economy of Scotland. And that is still very much a possibility today, although we can't really quantify the voting intentions, because this, unlike yesterday, this is a free vote today. And for those of you who don't know the difference, a free vote in the Houses of Parliament means that the MP can vote according to their own conscience, regardless of the party's policies. And that is not what happened yesterday. Yesterday there would have been whips. That means Tory MPs would have been told to vote for Mrs May's deal. And if they broke ranks and rebelled, well, they broke ranks and rebelled, and we saw that last night. But what will happen today is anybody's guess, because a lot of people will secretly be harbouring the intentions of that they've had all along, and that they dare not voice, of voting to leave the European Union with no deal at all, with nothing. Add to that the new information that is pumping out of pumping out of Downing Street at the moment, about the idea of zero tariffs for 87% of all goods coming from the European Union into British ports. Now this means that only 13% of imported goods from the EU would be taxed in the United Kingdom. Now this is, when you think about this, what they're actually doing is creating an almost free trade offer with the European Union. And it's a sop. This is to say to people who thought Brexit was a bad idea, that the British government can actually reduce tariffs on inbound goods, including, incidentally, food, And this was one of the biggest worries that everybody has about no deal. So the British government is now saying that they can manage that risk by saying to the EU that we're not going to apply tariffs to their food being imported into the UK. And this is supposed to make us all feel happy about the idea of Britain basically leaving the European Union in a mess, which is exactly what would happen in a no-deal Brexit. Is it going to make things better for anybody, though, to know that, yes, you'll be able to have your food, but you're still going to lose your job and your company is going to go to the wall? There's not much point, there's not much comfort in knowing that you can still buy a kumquat in Sainsbury's at the same price, even though your business is folded and you've lost your house and you're out on the street. So I don't think it's going to be much comfort to anybody. Now, adding into this are stories that the United Kingdom is putting about at the moment that it will create free trade with its former colonies, or what they like to call the Commonwealth, in a euphemism which covers hundreds of years of oppression and violence against the minorities in the countries that have been conquered. Most notably, we've had stories of the United Kingdom offering trade deals to everybody from Canada to Australia and New Zealand and India, although the Indians are not likely, I don't think, to go for a free trade agreement with a country which exploited them for about 200 years. But anyway, who am I to tell what India would do? But the upshot of all of this today is that we're on the brink of yet another cataclysmic vote, and we don't know what the English MPs will do. We know that Scottish MPs are probably, and I'm saying probably, not going to want to have a no-deal Brexit and will vote against that. It depends on how the amendment is phrased. They're saying they're voting on whether or not a no-deal is acceptable, so I guess that all of the SNP MPs will vote against any no-deal Brexit because we don't want it. Basically, it's as simple as that. But we're only 35 MPs, plus one or two Greens who might also jump on board, and maybe a few Labour MPs who might also jump on board from the English side. But nobody knows. And I think that people have got to the point where the constituencies in England which wanted Brexit are now absolutely screaming for it and champing at the bit and saying it's not acceptable for there to be no Brexit at all on the 29th, and they don't want it delayed. So it's entirely possible and completely unpredictable, but it's entirely possible that a no-deal Brexit might happen. And the fact that the British government is now putting out stories about managing no-deal Brexit, this is their phraseology, a managed no-deal Brexit, that they can somehow impose their own rules on the rest of the world so that they can have the same arrangements as they have at the moment and have the same deals with all of these countries by forcing their own rules onto the rest of us is ludicrous. And their story about what's going to happen in Ireland is even more ludicrous. Now they're saying that the British government will not erect any kind of border controls across the island of Ireland in a no-deal Brexit, that they will leave the borders open, which means that goods coming from Northern Ireland into, say, Scotland will have come from the EU without any checks whatsoever, and without any deal in place, without any free trade agreement between the countries, without any proper checks at the border on what's inside some of these trucks. It's going to be an absolute field day, an open goal, effectively, for smuggling of any kind. You know, people smuggling drugs, weapons, terrorists, you name it, they'll all get through on the nod because of the British government's open borders policy. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't the whole point of Brexit to stop the free flow of people in and out of the United Kingdom? And isn't this deal to keep the border in Ireland completely wide open, just an open gate to anybody from the EU who could fly to Ireland from mainland Europe or get a ferry and then just drive onto a ferry across the Irish Sea into Scotland or into any of the west coast ports in England and just merge into the scenery when they got here? Surely this is the exact opposite of what Brexit is supposed to actually provide us. which is this more security and keeping out the nasty, evil people from Europe. But it's not going to work, is it? Not if you've got an open border in Northern Ireland. That means there's going to be a border down the Irish Sea. But everybody say, oh no, there's no border down the Irish Sea because blah, blah, blah. We're just making stuff up as we go along. The truth is that there will have to be border checks then at the ports on the west coast of England. But from Cairnryan, that's Northern Ireland, to Scotland, if Northern Ireland is still officially part of the UK, then that border is open, and that means there would be no customs checks into Scottish ports at Cairnryan. But there would be customs checks into England, because they want to keep out the riffraff of the European Union, and anything coming from, let's say, the Republic of Ireland across to England is going to need customs checks, and that means there's going to need to be new customs posts erected in England's west coast ports. So Liverpool, for example, or Hartlepool, or wherever, all the way up the west coast of England, where there are any connections with the Republic of Ireland, they will need to have a customs post in each port. But in Scotland, we won't need it because we don't have any direct sea links to the Republic, which means that all the goods coming into Cairnryan, for example, would have no customs checks, which is going to promote the idea of trucks diverting off the major routes in southern Scotland and onto a very minor trunk road that will take them to Cairnryan, where they know they can get through and onto a ferry without any customs checks, and where they know when they get to Northern Ireland that they won't be held up by customs checks either, and then they can just simply drive over the open border into the Republic without ever having had their loads checked. All of this seems to have escaped the Brexit Secretary, the Prime Minister, and all the other idiots who appear to be running this Brexit fiasco. But these are the facts. These are the realities of what they're actually proposing to do in this so-called managed no-deal Brexit. It's not managed at all. Basically, the British government and the British state are trying to force their own Brexit deal onto everybody else and pretend that there's no border when there are borders, create areas where there aren't borders, where there should be borders, and have a border in the Irish Sea which stops at the Isle of Man, and then no border between Northern Ireland and Scotland, providing a clear route for smuggling for any kind of goods, human traffic, drugs, explosives, bombs, you name it. It can all come flooding in through Cairnryan and then south into England without ever having been looked at, and without the truck being opened, and without a single piece of paper being examined at any point during its journey. And this is the more secure Brexit future that we've been told that we were supposed to be looking forward to, a more secure future where there was no risk of people flooding into the country through the open doors of the EU and its common its policy of free movement would all end, and the British government's creating a humongous back door right through Ireland and Scotland where everybody can migrate from Europe into England. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible that anybody thinks that this is a good idea. But yet, it's actually being put out by Downing Street as part of their contingency planning for this no-deal Brexit, which may or may not happen. If the no-deal Brexit is voted against, and then there's another vote tomorrow on whether to delay Article 50, if delaying Article 50 fails, then we go to a no-deal Brexit again. So just because they voted against a no-deal Brexit doesn't stop no-deal Brexit from happening. It just says they don't want it to happen. But it will happen anyway if they don't vote for Article 50 to be extended. The European Union has said they will not extend Article 50 further than 2 months at the most, because for every month that Article 50 is extended, the EU plans to charge the British government £1 billion. So in 2 years, if they kick the can down the road 2 years, that's another £24 billion added on to the already £39 billion divorce settlement. And it just keeps growing. So the debt that the UK is running up with its dithering, is going to increase and increase day by day. And in the meantime, the screaming in England for Brexit to happen is going to increase. All the way through a BBC broadcast this morning in breakfast time, there was a man singing in the background at the top of his voice about the European Union. And this is what's going to happen. People will take to the streets, and it won't be singing that they're doing in England. They'll be marching. And there's going to be a lot of trouble if Brexit gets cancelled in the towns that voted for it. And remember, a lot of areas of England voted for Brexit. In Scotland, interestingly, the polls are showing that there is now a 60% majority in favour of a new independence referendum. Now, this is an important distinction. This is not saying that 60% of Scots want independence. This says that 60% of Scots want a referendum on independence. They want the right to choose. It suggests that 60% of Scots might want to vote for independence, but there's not proof of it yet. But the timescale for this independence referendum, when people are asked their opinions, varied quite widely, anywhere from within 2 years to sometime within 10 years. But the point was that when you added all those votes up, it came to 60% of the people who were questioned. And this was in a panel-based poll conducted in Scotland this week. But what it does show is that no matter what kind of Brexit the independence referendum was set against in questions, the Scottish voters voted for independence 60% above any form of Brexit. Didn't matter what colour it was or how soft or hard it was, whether it was no deal or with a deal. Brexit is very unpopular. Only 30% of Scottish people would acquiesce to staying in the Union through Brexit. All of the rest of us want out of Brexit. We want out of the Union, and we want the chance to vote on it. At least that's what these polls suggest. Now, the next part of this broadcast deals with a rather more complicated subject. Complicated because in the SNP's recent writings about the new currency that they're proposing, they had suggested that it would have to meet 6 tests that were suggested in the Growth Commission's report from last year. Now, the Growth Commission's report assumed that Scotland would keep using the British pound while it worked up its economy and built up its reserves and so on, until they felt that it was then ready and met these tests and was ready to use its own currency. The problem was, or the problem is, why would you want to spend the first 5 years as an independent country with the Bank of a foreign country deciding your domestic and foreign economic policies? Why would you want the Bank of England controlling your interest rate? Why would you want the English pound governing everything that you do? Surely it's better to start with the currency of your own to begin with, and to capitalise that currency by ensuring that you sell enough government bonds. These are investments which guarantee a return in Scotland for people who put their money into the Scottish currency. If we sold enough bonds, and we can back this up with oil, we can back it up with our economic figures, our growth figures, our GDP, all of these things are outperforming the UK at the moment, we'd produce a currency, a hard currency with a very high value, potentially higher than the English currency by about 10% right from the offset. And Commonweal, who you may have heard of, is a think tank in Scotland which looks at the actual mechanics of running an independent Scottish economy with a new currency, has shown that from their research that having the currency within 3 years of independence, or within 3 years of, say, a yes vote, is the ideal. In other words, you want to start with the new currency coming into effect on the day that you declare your independence. Now, that might be 1.5 to 2 years after the yes vote. But the good thing about that is that you would end up running your own affairs right from the beginning with no influence whatsoever from either the British state or its own central bank. And you would have had withdrawn all of the deposits which belong to Scotland from that English central bank, the Bank of England, and deposited them in the new Scottish central bank, along with the money that you've obtained from selling bonds, from selling investments in the Scottish economy. It's all very complicated, but the basic idea is, Why start a new Scottish economy off where an English bank controls the money supply to that economy? It would be crazy. You would be in a hawk to your neighbour still. We wouldn't be free economically to make our own choices and to remodel our economy the way we want it to work. So Commonweal has put forward amendments to the proposals that will be put to the SNP's meeting coming up soon, their conference, that would amend this suggestion of the six so-called six tests that were suggested in the Growth Commission's report. Remember, the Growth Commission's report is the most pessimistic, idiotic, nonsensical way that you would start a new country. It's the one that assumes that you would pay debts to the English government, which you don't actually owe them, because they borrowed money that they said they borrowed for you. And it assumes that we would help to get down their debt, that we would basically sell off a part of our own economy to free ourselves from their economy. It makes a whole lot of radical assumptions about how we would bend over to allow the British state to shaft us for as much money as possible before we left. And nobody in the right mind, when they're starting a new country, would do that. So why does the Growth Commission attract so much support in the Scottish, in the SNP? I don't know. But I do know that the groundswell of opinion amongst the independence movement, at least of which I can judge from the amount of mail I get from people on this subject, the general feeling is that we want our new economy to start with the new currency as soon as we're free. And we don't want to be waiting around using the pound and being controlled from the heart of the Bank of England in London, controlling the value of our currency and controlling the interest rates of the new Scottish state. It would be stupid, in my opinion, and in the opinions of many people in the independence movement. So really, it is important, I think, for the SNP to look at this more carefully and take into account not just the Growth Commission report, which, let's face it, was written from the viewpoint of the British state, not the new Scottish state. So let's look at things from the other end of the telescope. Let's look at things from the point of view of the new Scottish state. What does it actually need? Not what does Britain want to get out of us before we go, which is what the Growth Commission appears to be suggesting. So we have a little conundrum to solve with our currency, and I think it can be done at the Scottish National Party conference by simply amending this original motion that the Scottish currency be sterlingised, as they say, by using the British currency until almost indefinitely until these six tests are met. It could be decades before these six tests are met, and we could be harnessed to the Bank of England for 20 years after independence. It would be crazy. It's the same argument that the Brexiters use for why we should leave the European Union, because it's why we didn't join the euro. Actually, was because the British did not want their bank interest rates being decided by the European Central Bank. They didn't want their country's interest rates set by a different bank. And I'm only suggesting the same thing for us here. Just as I don't know how many senior British politicians have said this in the last 24 hours, but a state which is in a treaty with another state or group of states should have the right to unilaterally walk away from that treaty. It should not have to ask permission to end a treaty. And because all of these big wigs and big hitters in the Tory party, for instance, the Attorney General yesterday, before him, David Davis, said the same thing, that a country in a union with another country or countries in a treaty with them should not have to ask their permission before leaving. And if it's sauce for the goose, then surely it's sauce for the gander. If it's good enough for English Brexiters to leave the EU, then it's good enough for Scots to leave the United Kingdom too. And if that's the case, then we should not leave and use the English currency anymore. We should leave and use the Scottish pound, which is at the moment worth 10% of the deposits of the Bank of England. That's Scotland's share. And that 10%, incidentally, will lower the value of the pound to 90 pence. So as soon as we become independent And as soon as we get our own currency, the pound would plummet anyway, as a natural consequence of Scotland setting up its own currency. England's currency will lose 10% because they're losing Scotland. It's not so much Scotland walking away from the British pound, it's the rest of the United Kingdom walking away from the Scottish 10%. That's the truth of the matter. That's what is not being told to you when you talk about the new currency. Scotland's currency is going to be worth more than the pound. And because it's worth more than the pound, your pension, when you come to get it, if it's paid in Scottish pounds, is going to be 10% higher at least. And also, if you're paid in Scottish pounds and you're taxed in Scottish pounds, then that money is also worth more. It will buy more. It will buy more currency in other countries. It will let you go on holiday more cheaply. It will make foreign goods cheaper. It'll make everything cheaper because your money is worth more. Anyway, enough on the currency. That's it for today's show. We have to again sit and wait. I have suggested today in a couple of posts that, considering the marginalisation that the Scottish MPs have been suffering at Westminster, I think either today or maybe later tomorrow that the Scottish SNP MPs should simply all leave the Commons for good, and just tell them that we're leaving for good because we're not being listened to, nothing we say makes any difference, our speeches, our contributions to debate are cut off, nothing is allowed to be shown on television, we are being airbrushed out of the reality of Britain at the moment. And if Britain wants us to not exist and not appear on TV, then what is the point of our MPs actually being in Westminster at all? All we've done so far is squeaked. We're not the lion down there at the moment roaring. We're a mouse squeaking amongst all of this racket that goes on in Westminster. We're not being heard. Our voice is not being heard. It's not being listened to. We're being ignored. We have been airbrushed out of existence. As far as the BBC is concerned, any news about Westminster does not contain Scottish politicians at all. We're just ignored. We're just bystanders. We're just bodies that are sitting on benches looking on while England decides everything, as though we acquiesce to this. I think, and I think a lot of the Yes campaigners believe this as well, that the time for the SNP MPs is almost up. And I think if not today, then certainly tomorrow, after all of these so-called meaningful votes have passed into the meaninglessness of Westminster, then is the time to go, because they've done everything, they've said everything they can, they've tried everything they possibly can to accommodate Brexit into what Scotland wants, and it can't be done. Trying to hammer a square peg into a round hole for the last 2 years, it's not possible. And I think that the policy of the SNP has been to continue to keep chipping away, to try to show the rest of the world that every possible scenario has been tried. And we have begged and cajoled and nagged and talked and speechified, and nothing works. There's no point in being in the British Parliament because we have no effect on it. We might as well not be there. So I hope, maybe Ian Blackford watches this show, that tomorrow, after the third meaningless vote, and after the point where a no-deal Brexit might be happening, then is the time to leave, have a press conference and say it's pointless Scotland being here anymore, and we don't want to be here anymore, so we're going home, and just take his MPs home, and cause an uproar, cause a fracture in Westminster, cause a big gap to appear in the Westminster benches. I don't think anybody would blame them for walking out. After the way Ian Blackford has been treated at Westminster is shameful. I've never seen anybody be so rejected and omitted and silenced and gagged as many times as that man has been in the last few months. Okay, that's it for today. I will be presenting Scotland at 7 tomorrow evening on Broadcasting Scotland, so tune in on YouTube to watch that. There might be an IndyCar show tomorrow. Depends what happens tonight, actually, what I'm going to be reporting. But at the moment, it could be a no-deal Brexit is looming. It could be that they've bottled it again and they're going to have another meaningless vote tomorrow on whether or not we should kick the can down the road and delay Article 50 yet again. But will the Brexiteers wear it? And will the various towns and counties which wanted out of the EU, will those voters stand for that? I don't think they will, and I don't think they will allow their MPs to retain their seats if they don't get their Brexit. We'll see. Anyway, I'll see you all tomorrow. Have a great day. Bye for now.